My name is Evan Hozinski. I'm going to be going over what is offensive security. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So a little bit about me. I'm a tradecraft engineer. That basically means that I also build tools that we use at work. So that could be anything from malware that works on single computers to tools that maybe communicate over the network. I built protocols for communication from one computer to another. So I do a lot of building and I do a lot of pen testing. So those are my first two bullets there. I also do a lot of social engineering. So if you've ever heard about those emails that get people in a lot of trouble, I send those and test companies that way. Something I like to call password hardening as well. So I've built like a massive computer used for cracking passwords in an environment just to show people how weak or strong their password policies are. Do a lot of, like I said, malware development. I've been teaching for quite some time. I've been tutoring for the past probably over a decade at this point in different things. And I do a lot of research. So one thing I really enjoy doing and one thing I really try to find when I go to a new company is opportunities for research people who are willing to pay me to look at things in a deeper lens and pay me to, get infrastructure in and say, if I send an email this way, does it get past this? If I build a password this way, can I crack it this way? So I do a lot of research and I really enjoy that. And public speaking. So kind of like what I'm doing here, I also speak at a lot of events. I've spoken at conferences like GERCON, which is what I'm wearing right here, on my research topics. And I really enjoy getting to meet everybody there and kind of going through and hashing ideas back and forth with people who are also interested in the same things. So that's a little bit about me. Just a disclaimer, just something we have to put out there, right? So these are real pen testing scenarios. If I go over any information, these are things that I've actually done on the job. While they're neat and I really enjoy what I do, at the same time, you really should only do these things with consent. So just disclaiming out there, if you want to do these things, you want to practice these things, there are venues to do that with. Hack the Box being one of them. Try Hack Me is another one. For paid things, or unpaid things, you could always do things like what's it called, VulnHub. You can download different virtual machines, and you could practice against those, and tons of walkthroughs and things. Everything I know as far as pen testing and all my research, I have learned on my own. I've been programming for quite some time, and spent a lot of time going into the deeper details and working in binary and trying to learn ASM a little better for assembly. But everything I know, I'm self-taught, so you can definitely teach yourself, but make sure you do it in the proper ways, and you always have consent when you're doing these things. So. All right, so how to get started. So my story didn't really start the way that I had intended it to. Looking back at it now, obviously I wouldn't change it, but it's something I wish I had an easier avenue. So I grew up in Detroit. We didn't have a lot of money, so I actually didn't touch computers as far as like learning and things pretty late in my life. So I want to say I was about 18. I went to college and I studied like poli-sci and philosophy. I had a double major in that, and I was kind of sad because my college didn't actually offer any form of security or pen testing. There was no STEM when I was in school, none of that stuff. So I was a little behind the curve. When I graduated, I moved to a whole new state. Still wasn't really loving what I was doing, and somebody at the time actually told me to go back to school, so that's what I did. I went to DeVry, which wasn't really a good school, but I had to kind of show my willingness to learn, I guess, in the tech field, even though I had been touching and working on computers for quite some time on my own, but I didn't have any professional experience. So once I kind of got DeVry under my belt, I had moved from there to DePaul University. So I got my master's at DePaul. I did a lot of host-based security. I'm really grateful for my time at DePaul. I learned a lot, just low-level computing, network protocols, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, so alerting and alarming, those kinds of things. So a lot of defense. And so actually from there, what I ended up doing was getting into something called digital forensics. For those who don't know, that's when something happens or so, like a computer is compromised or something, if something is hacked, usually a digital forensic specialist will come in and they'll say, like, what do I see in memory? What do I see in the as far as like how a computer works? There's a file system. Is there anything in the file system that might tell me what this person did to this computer or like how they got in? So I did that for some time. I really thought that was going to be my path because I kind of thought I'd missed my red team opportunity. About a year and a half, maybe 2 years into that, I got an offer from a big four company to do pen testing. So I went straight from defense and digital forensics. I got offered to do not just pen testing, but senior pen testing. They really enjoyed my conversation. They really enjoyed the way that I spoke at a lower level about these things. So I immediately got brought in as a senior, and I kind of had to earn my merit in a way. I think the hardest part about that for me was kind of transitioning from everything I knew on defense and pushing that into offense, right? Converting what I know about how to defend something into how to attack something. I would say it took me about 6 months to really get a good grasp on that and convert my knowledge of programming and software development into offense, right? Because it really isn't in school. They don't really teach you how to do that. They teach you how to secure things, they teach you how to build things, but not how to attack things. So that took me a little while. And from there, just kind of grew. I got thrown at phishing because nobody, if you work in this industry, nobody actually likes building the phishing infrastructure. They'll tell you to use tools that are built in 2000, 2008, somewhere around there. They don't really work. So I built my own phishing infrastructure. So I'm actually planning to release a tool this year that I built myself. That I already have a lot of companies that are willing to not just pay for it, but beta for it. So like do a lot of testing and give me feedback, what they like, what they don't like. And I also build a lot of other tools like password hardening tools too that I also do the same thing with. So that's kind of my story. It was very roundabout. I've technically only been professionally pen testing since 2020, but I've pretty much, ever since I was a kid and I had my dad's laptop and I cracked that open and I broke my dad's laptop. I don't recommend that. But that's where all my learning began when I was a kid. I was self-taught. I wanted to open up everything. I wanted to see how it all worked. So I think that was beneficial. Had I had STEM, had I had opportunities like this, I think that would have been a lot easier of a path, but wouldn't change it for anything. So that's just a little bit about me. Other things to know, you don't need to go to college. I've actually worked with quite a few professionals that never went to college. Michael, who taught this with me last year, didn't go to college and he's extremely brilliant, good kid. You don't really need certs. I think right now it's a little hard to say that, especially because it's such a small market. Certifications are really good if you don't have a lot of experience, right? So because I had a lot of experience in other fields, it was easier for me to transition. But if you're coming straight out of college and you don't have that experience, certifications kind of help you bridge that gap. One of the smarter persons I know, he was fresh out of college and he got a job on my last team with us simply because he had certs. He had so many certs. So there's something to say for certs if you were lacking that experience, but it's not a requirement. I really didn't get any certs until last year. That was my first two. And it was just because it was industry standard. So at that point, I had a lot of, I'll call them mentees, like people that I've been kind of working with my whole life that got them. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be the mentor, I should probably have these certs too. So I went and got the certs, but I definitely don't think you have to have them. Just keep in mind if you're having a hard time finding something, or if you want a little bit more or learn a little bit more about pen testing, certs help you with that, but they'll also kind of help you bridge that gap, if you're missing that experience. So passion, you definitely have to love it. You have to love what you're doing. It's not what it is in the movies. It's a lot of staring at a terminal and looking at lines of code. Depending on what field you get in, it's different types of things you're looking at, but at the end of the day, it all looks the same, right? It's all looking at responses. It's all sending things and fuzzing, and there's a bunch of terms I could throw at you, but essentially you have to really love it. You have to really understand what's going on. And I think a lot of people live for that moment where you've done something big, right? So my very first time ever, we call it getting domain admin, but actually like taking a Fortune 500 company and owning the entire thing. I could do whatever I want. There's no box that opens up with a bunch of confetti. It's just you did the thing and the thing worked, and you're like, great, like I'm the only person who understands how cool this is. So you just have to really have a passion for it and kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Support yourself, right? Like when you get there, and I'd made that big step, I ran upstairs and I told my fiance, and she just looked at me like that means nothing to me, but I was super excited. So, it just comes with the love of the gig and the love of the passion for the job and really enjoying what you're doing. So, if you don't have the passion, it's really hard to stay in this career, mainly because there's a lot of things that you probably don't want to do, like writing reports, talking to clients, maybe working on phishing, which I like, but a lot of people don't. So, passion is very important. Something else to keep in mind is networking. So I personally don't network very much. I sound very talkative, and I can be, but I'm definitely more an introvert. So I don't really like going out and meeting new people. But in this career, if you're having a hard time getting around and like finding a job, networking is huge, right? So it's a very small niche community. A lot of the people that you'll meet at conferences, you'll see again at the next conference. That's kind of been my experience. So just making sure you know the right people, give off the right intentions, really be invested and interested in everything they have to say as far as like new technologies and new tools, and just kind of get an idea of how that works. But just genuinely trying to get to know somebody or understand something better that they're teaching, especially at conferences, like just networking that way is really important in this field. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. All right. So things to know. So pen testing is a lot of things, but you're not a master of any of them. Jack of all trades, master of none. So one of the big thing is understanding networking. So this one is talking about systems. So networking in the aspect of how do computers communicate with each other, how do different types of computers communicate with each other, what protocols might they use, how do they send information, how do they download files, all that stuff. Web application principles. Even if you don't have an interesting web app like me, you have to have a basic understanding of web apps. A lot of times what you'll find on a network is essentially a web app that leads you to bigger things. So there might be some outdated web app that exists that you can use to get onto another computer. And while you really only care about the computer, you have to have an understanding of web apps to do that. So there's an entire field for web applications. I am not going to say I'm a web app tester. It's probably my least favorite. I'd say cloud is my least favorite area of expertise, but I do have some expertise in that field. Cloud principles. Cloud is getting massive. You've heard of like AWS, I'm sure Azure, all these things. There's always new technologies for cloud. It's gotten to the point where it's pretty big, so you can make an entire living off of working in cloud by itself. So just making sure that you pick a field that you like. Try not to be the best at all three because it won't happen. But have an understanding that I might be an amazing networking and pen tester, but I also have to understand web apps and clouds. That's just a part of the job. So, because a lot of times you'll find, people don't think about it, but when you get into somebody's internal network, they store a lot of things on the cloud. So you still have to have an understanding of how does that work? How can I get around that? How can I use that to get onto their cloud and maybe find passwords or whatever, So just having an understanding of everything. There's also a bunch of tools. I talked about building tools, which is true. I love to build tools, but sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So using things like Metasploit, Burp Suite, and Wireshark, which are all tools for different things. But having those tools that are well established, that are kind of like industry norms and standards, being able to use those, explain how to use them in an interview and things like that is very important. And the communication. So, I speak to a lot of clients all the time. I think the one thing that I never thought about when I got into this, that I think about all the time now, is most of my job is explaining to somebody not what I did, but how to fix it, right? So I might come in and say, hey, I did these 10 things. And then I can't just leave that for a client, because a lot of times their security engineers, while they're working in a secure environment, they might have an understanding of like how to build things or how to make things do one thing. They might not understand that by doing it this way, I misconfigured it so I can do another thing. So I would argue most of my job is report writing and explaining to clients how to fix what I found. So being able to communicate concisely and clearly with clients, really trying to take away that vibe of me versus you, right? A lot of times you go in there and the defense guys want nothing to do with me because they think I'm out to just make them look bad. At the end of the day, I'm there to do a job, and I'm there to help them improve their job. If I left there and something bad happened to that team and they never fixed the problem I had, that would be on them. But at the end of the day, my goal is to make them secure. So kind of removing that us versus them mentality and just being able to speak with everybody, both technically and in kind of like layman's terms as well. Communicating with team members is important. While I'll say, especially this job, my last one, I didn't really work with a lot of team members. Usually a lot of this is solo. You kind of get put on your own engagement. But like I said before, I have a lot of mentees, and the reason for that is they'll have a lot of questions. You won't remember everything. So people who have been in the industry longer might remember something that you don't. So it's always good to have those people you can communicate with on your team or in the past and say, hey, I've got this scenario. I've tried these things. This didn't work. And so having those relationships with those team members and leaving and still having those relationships with those team members is really important. I still talk to, I'd say about 60% of the people I've ever worked with. I have like a Discord chat with a lot of them. And while we don't get into detail about clients, we'll say, hey, I've got this thing. And it's really cool to be able to, reach out to all these people who have their own niches and their own specialties and say, help me find this. So I really enjoy that. And then writing reports, right? So that's a huge part of the job, is getting in there saying, I found all these cool things. You did all the fun stuff, but now you got to write the reports. All right, so a day in the life, right? So what you can see is you typically work in 2 week stints. It's a little different in my current job, but for the most part, this is true. Week one is going to be like scoping calls, or kind of like figuring out like what am I allowed to touch? What am I allowed to attack? What am I not allowed to attack? What time of day can I do that? Then you get into preparation, right? So sending them something or making them sprint up a virtual machine that I can use as my point of attack. The third part, attacking, the fun part that most of you probably came here for. Updates. So whenever I find something, especially if it's really critical, it's really important for me to communicate back to the client. Daily emails or just emails when I find something is typically what I end up finding. And then clean up. So sometimes what you'll do when you perform an exploit, you might leave some artifacts behind or just pieces of code or things that you've used to get to that level. So it's really important that you clean those things up for later. Sometimes I'll end up changing passwords so that I can get in and use that user to do something else. So it's really important to either reset that user, make them change it, or change it back to what it was. So keeping that in mind. Week two is usually the less fun stuff. So kind of summarizing what you found, usually an email or a quick call, writing the report out of everything with really good detail. Get really good at report writing. Managers love good report writers. Readouts. So not every time, but I would say most of the time, we'll read out to the client, or we'll explain not only what was in the report, even though you sent it to them, it's like more in depth, right? Like I found this and this is why this is important. This is how I found it. This is what you can probably do to mitigate it. Your report will say some of that, but it's really on you to explain. Like I said before, you're explaining to the client what you found and why it's important and how to fix it. And then retesting. So sometimes those clients will pay to you to come back in and say, hey, did I fix this? I just had one the other day where they fixed the problem, but then they created a new problem. So I went and did a retest. I said, yeah, you fixed it, but here's this other thing that you've just created by doing this. And this is what I mean is a lot of times they'll fix it with, ChatGPT or something that they knew or thought that would fix it, and then they'll come out and they'll break it entirely in another way. So I did a retest, and it was a really quick scan. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, you fixed the problem, but you've created a new one. So retesting is very important. And then I'll try to go through this really quick, but one of my favorite moments, and I talked about it last year as well, is using programming to attack a web app for a client. So I found on their website that they had this link, and this link at the end of it had this URL. So I was able basically to just create a query, which I'll kind of go into in the second part here. And the query basically let me figure out who all the users were in the database, as well as kind of make queries to the database itself, give me the information. So if you can see this picture here, it says PostgreSQL, it says the version, it says the operating system, and that it was compiled using GCC. So I was able to make the database do everything. And the reason it looks like this with all these weird dips is because I was basically telling it to give me like positive or negatives back, like, yeah, this letter's A, yeah, this letter's B. And so it would fill in spaces as it got there. This is just a sample of using that tool to kind of figure out if these users existed and what their names were and their emails. So again, I was able to send requests, and based on the response I got from the web application, whether the length was a certain amount, so it could have either been 13,957 or 12,747. So based on that response, I was able to tell whether or not a user's email was valid or not. So I could just guess emails and eventually figure out if they were right or wrong. And then with those users, I was able to figure out passwords. So I was able to brute force and just constantly send requests saying, is this the password over and over again until I got what was a 302 response. You can see it here. And then the length was a little different as well, right? So there's two different ways for me to know if this was a good or bad user. And this was, or password, sorry. And that was just based on the response or the length of the response. And then from there, I was able to basically reset admin passwords, take over the database, and move into the environment. And then it all ends up with writing a report, right? Which is the least favorite part. So